Our guest today is Caroline Cazalt. She is a student at Falmouth Academy, and she also doesn't know a lot about the case, but was interested in learning more about it. So she's going to be with us for the 4th episode on his 4th canonical victim, Catherine Eddowes. Hi, Caroline. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Sophie.
The Jack the Ripper murders occurred in the East End of London in 1888, and although he was only a threat to a small section of the community, in a small part of London, the crimes had a huge impact on society as a whole. In the previous episodes of Cold Case, Faye and I discussed his first canonical victim, Mary Nichols. Willow LaJoy and I discussed his second canonical victim, and Willow Wakefield and I discussed his third canonical victim. So if you have not listened to any of those episodes yet, I suggest listening to them before this one. So, Caroline, I'm not sure if you have listened to the past few episodes yet.
I haven't yet.
Okay, well, so on our last episode, I talked to Willow Wakefield about his third victim, Elizabeth Stride, and surprisingly, Elizabeth Stride was killed on the same night as Catherine Eddowes, which is the one that we will be talking about.
Of like the same year?
Yeah, the same exact
Wow.
night. And so I guess I'll give you a little bit of background into what had happened earlier in the night, so you understand kind of how we got to Catherine's murder later that day.
Thank you.
So a few days before this murder, which was on September 30th, 1888, whoever he was, Jack the Ripper, sent a letter, which is sort of the infamous The Boss letter. He sent it to the news agency, and it was signed Jack the Ripper, which is sort of where the name came from, because he named himself that. And this letter basically detailed what he's going to do in his next kill. And one of the things he noted in this letter was that his next victim will have the earlobes cut off. So, keep that in the back of your mind.
That's a little funky.
Yeah, he's a little special. So Elizabeth Stride's body was found around 1 a.m., 1 to 2 a.m. We are not sure the exact time, but we think it was closer to 1 a.m. And so Catherine Eddowes' body is discovered around 1:45 a.m., so very close to Elizabeth Stride's body.
Was the proximity, the location close nearby, or?
Well, I will tell you about that, because it wasn't too far away, but it wasn't like right next to
I understand.
it or anything.
Yeah, I get you.
Yeah. So basically, at more or less the exact time that the body of Elizabeth Stride was being discovered in Dutfield's yard, another prostitute named Catherine, or some refer to her as Kate, Eddowes, was being released from Bishopsgate Police Station, which is right in the heart of London. So this is how she was arrested and why she was there. Basically at around 8:30, the night of the 29th, that would be. She had obviously been out. She was looking for, to gain money. She was a prostitute. And so she was at a bar, and she got basically really drunk, to put it simply. And she basically went outside and laid down on the cement pavement and just went to sleep on the side of the road. And obviously, the cops would have to take anyone who was out like that outside of an establishment to the station to be held overnight. So P.C. Robinson of the city police arrived and asked if anyone knew her or knew where she lived, and nobody did. So he took her to the police station, and she didn't give them a name. I'm not sure why, but she didn't give them her name. And they put her in a cell, and they kept her there until she, sobered up. But she was asleep from around 10 until 12:15, where she had woken up. And she was singing in her cell, actually. So the policeman heard her and said, well, can you, take care of yourself now? And she was like, yes, I'm fine. So at around 12:55, he took her out of the cell and asked her for her name and address for the release papers, where she told him her name was Mary Ann Kelly of 6 Fashion Street.
That's a lie, though.
Yeah, we know that's a
Wow.
lie. She didn't want to give her real name, but
I ponder why.
yeah, I ponder too. I'm not sure about it. I don't know. She probably just didn't want people to know.
Yeah.
Basically, she got pushed out into the alley and was like told to go home and that she shouldn't be out at this hour. And Kate was like, all right, good night. And she walked down Mitre Square, which is right near the police station. And actually, she was walking at the same time the murder of Elizabeth Stride was also heading towards the square, coming from the opposite direction. So Elizabeth was killed.
When she was being released from jail?
Yeah. So he was walking
So-
the same way as her at the same time.
That's kind of weird.
Coincidence.
I wonder if it was just like a opportunity, crime of opportunity,
Yes.
or it was.
Yes, none of these murders were pre-planned. He didn't stalk the victims before. It was more he needed someone to kill, and it just
Yeah.
happened to be wrong place.
Sounds like a crazy guy to me.
Yeah, he was really messed up. Whoever he was.
Wait, they never found him?
No, see, that's why we call him Jack the Ripper, because that's his pen name. But we've never figured it out, which is why it's so interesting to this day. Just the fact
Yeah,
that
I concur.
nobody knows who it was. I mean, there are a ton of suspects, but
That's
nobody knows.
bewildering to me.
Yeah, it is. At around 1:30, PC walk-ins of the city police passed the southeast corner that brought him through Mitre Square. So he basically was on a schedule where he would pass through every 12 to 15 minutes through the square. So he had his lantern on, and he was looking around. Nobody was in the square, so he let...
The police guy?
Yes, the policeman,
Okay.
who was sort of on watch.
Yes.
So he was, he saw nobody in the square at 1:30, so he left the square. Although 5 minutes later, 3 gentlemen, these are kind of interesting names, Harry Harris, double name, Joseph Levy, and Joseph Lawwendy, so 2 Josephs, left the Imperial Club on Duke Street, and they passed its junction and went into the square, where they saw a man and woman talking quietly together. The woman, obviously had her back to them, so they couldn't see her face, but they could see that they were very close together. And Joseph Levy was convinced that they were a couple and that they were sort of up to no good, so they all ended up leaving. But they all did see something similar,
Yeah.
but their descriptions of the couple are a little bit different. I mean, Joseph Lawwendy was a little less disgusted. He was a little more observant than the other 2 were. And although he hadn't seen the woman's face, he was almost certain that her clothing was that worn by Catherine Eddowes when he was later shown her body to the police. So he basically identified her as the woman with the man.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And although the street lighting wasn't very good, he saw a brief glimpse of the man's face and gave the police a description. He said that, he said that he was about 30, around 5'9", and medium build, fair complexion, a small mustache, and he
Ew.
said...
Sorry. Mustaches already gives me the creeps.
Well, he said he had a reddish handkerchief that was tied in a knot, and he had some loose-fitting jacket and a gray cap on. That was his description. But he only really saw a quick glimpse of the man, so it wasn't, he
That
wasn't
detailed,
Exactly. Yeah, but when looking at the time of Elizabeth's murder and the time that they were out in the square, and it all adds up, we can be sure, pretty much sure that this was the face of Jack the Ripper. The same policeman, P.C. Watkins, who walked around the square at like 1:20, came back around 1:45, and went into the square. And immediately he saw Catherine Eddowes' body lying on her back in a pool of blood with her clothes sort of thrown up and tossed about, as it would if you had fallen.
Yeah. It's crazy how life can change so quickly.
Yeah, I guess it is, yeah. Basically, he called for his backup, sort of, his other
I get you.
cops or detectives. And they also brought a doctor in, Dr. Sakira. I think I'm saying that right. So he met two of the other policemen and brought them to the square. And he was at the scene by, I think, 1:55. So within 10 minutes he was there. And he examined the body, and, well, the cause of death was that the murderer had cut the windpipe and the blood vessels,
Oh my gosh.
So that was cause
That
of
is
death.
gruesome.
That's cause of death. But he also thought that the murderer possessed no great anatomical skill. In other words, like,
Yeah.
he only had a
Just like-
basic knowledge of
Yeah.
anatomy.
Were the earlobes knocked off?
And well, that is my next point. One of the important features of the murder was that, as I said earlier, her right ear was obviously detached after the killer had, like, mutilated her face.
That's crazy. I wonder why the ear.
Well, I mean, the discovery of this severed ear sort of provided,
Foundation.
yeah, and
Evidence.
evidence that he had sent the Dear Boss letter, and that that is the real killer, and that letter should really be focused and dissected and analyzed to see
is
if they could figure out.
bewildering.
Yeah, it is. It is bewildering. So after he had murdered Catherine Eddowes, he fled east from Mitre Square towards the east end of London, where he actually left a clue in a doorway in Gloucester
Ooh.
Street.
What was the clue?
Great question. Well,
Thanks.
so if you were wondering why he went east, so he had murdered twice in less than an hour and was obviously well aware that the area would be soon trying to hunt him down and all the cops would be looking for some murderer. So he didn't head to a relatively safe area of the streets, I would say. The west or the north or the south of the square would have been a lot safer, but instead he went east, which is exactly where the activity was directed to his capture. So they were all looking already in the East End, but he went east, which, I mean, detectives still don't understand why he did that.
Yeah.
But some suggest that he was heading for safety of his home or lodging. Must have been in the East End, which would make sense because that's where most of
Yeah.
the prostitutes were.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So detectives were already in this area, and surprisingly, the murderer had managed to slip right past them undetected as he headed back to the East End, even though the cops were all over the place. And it really is surprising because this happened really quickly.
Yeah.
You know.
It was a high escalation rate.
Yes, it was. Well, around 2:20, he passed through Gloucester Street, which, we can assume. I'm not certain, but the cops also were in Gloucester Street area at around 2:15, and they didn't find anything out of the ordinary. But then, around 2:55 in the morning, right on Gloucester Street, Alfred Long, who was a police officer, was walking past the doorway of some dwellings where he noticed a portion of an apron lying on the floor, sort of inside the doorway. Mm-hmm. And he looked at it and he noticed that it was covered with blood and other marks on it, which had suggested sort of like the blade of a knife had been wiped on it.
Yeah.
So he brought it back to the police station, but they had said, that's interesting because we just had someone go on that street at 2:20 and there was nothing there. But, 30 minutes later, that's there. So he had just slipped by them, which is crazy because he got by so many cops. He's highly trained, highly experienced.
Yeah, that's
he knows
crazy.
how to.
I wonder where he got those skills from.
I don't know. So basically, this apron is the only real clue that Jack the Ripper left behind, and it tells us actually a lot about the killer's intentions and appearance as he fled the scene, but it also raised a lot of questions. It obviously reveals to us which direction he went in, and they now think that he was heading towards his home, as I said. But it also questions his appearance as he fled from the scenes. There's a common belief that he must have been like drenched in blood, having, carried out 2 murders in one night. But this is probably not the case. Indeed, the apron tells us how much, incriminating blood he would have had on himself.
Was the blood Catherine's?
Probably Catherine and Elizabeth's.
Oh, yeah, I understand.
But unfortunately, there was no DNA at this time, so...
Oh.
Yeah, it was too early, so they couldn't really do any good tests.
Oh my gosh, that would have been like a game changer.
Exactly, that's why it's such an interesting case. It was so early that you really didn't have access to any...
DNA stuff.
Yeah.
That is bewildering.
Yeah, it is. So since the available evidence up to this point showed that he had strangled some of his victims before carrying out their kills, this would obviously mean that they were not alive for the worst parts of the kill, where he, did some other things, I would say. One of his victims had some guts missing, but that was not done while they were living, which I guess is a good thing.
Which I guess is better.
Yeah. So if he wasn't wearing like a large coat, that they wouldn't have had any suspicion if he like decided to remove it. But the only reason he took his jacket off was so he wouldn't get blood on it and he could switch his shirt. So basically this apron reveals like how much visible blood he did have on himself as he like walked through the streets, and he would have been able to wipe his hands and the blade of the knife on this like napkin, and I'm sure he would have wanted to wipe it away as soon as possible. And since we can assume that if he had stopped in the streets and wiped it away, he would have been noticed, he definitely required some cover to perform this task. So that's why many think that he either went in an alleyway or he just did it in like a corner of a building or something.
Yeah.
To be kept hidden. But if the apron solves the mystery of, why the killer was able to escape without anybody noticing, it also throws up another puzzle in that its presence in that particular doorway suggested that he lingered in that vicinity for much longer than he actually needed to. The journey from this square to this street where the apron was found is under 10 minutes. Probably 5 minutes. And the policemen had walked it in 20 minutes or so because they were a little slower in taking their time and looking for suspicious people or evidence along the way. So there are several routes that he could have taken, but they all could have been done around less than 10 minutes or 10 minutes or so. So if both policemen were correct about their evidence that the apron hadn't been there at 2:20 and then it had been there at 2:50, then the murderer had been in that area for anywhere between 35 minutes to an hour, which is interesting because, where was he when this was happening? Was he hiding in a warehouse? Like, why did he drop the apron there? He had been so meticulous up to this point. Did he mean to drop that? Did he do it on purpose? Was there some reason he put that there?
Like the house that the doorway he dropped it in, was there any significance about that doorway, or is it just a random doorway?
See, they had looked into who had lived there, but it was really nothing significant. Most of the policemen first thought when they saw the apron that someone might have been attacked, but once they walked inside the dwellings, they looked, and there was actually a note written in chalk, and it was on the wall directly above the apron that read, "The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing." And Jews was spelled Juwes, which this sort of threw another curve in the investigation.
Yeah,
because there had been a lot of anti-Semitism in that area right along that time. And so leaving this message, the police began to think that, it'll resurge racial unrest in the area, and they thought the consequences would be horrible. So the police thought, we got to erase the message. Like, we got to get rid of it. We got to, this is horrible. Like, if people see this, we just got to get rid of it. So they erased the graffiti, which is one of the biggest mistakes in the whole entire case. I mean, the police, they didn't even take a photo. I mean...
Yeah, because then you, couldn't even match the handwriting or something.
Yeah, so basically what they did was they only kept the part that said "the Jews are," and which is interesting, and...
I feel like that's the part you would erase.
Oh, wait. It was erased.
Okay.
Thank you. Wait, I was sorry. I meant to say the Jews are was the only part that was erased. And so, the police were had only a portion of the writing been removed. The context would have remained. So, that's why they deleted the Jews part. But
that makes sense.
When the other, cops came around 5, they obviously asked about the writing on the wall, and the cops were told about it and were confused why it was erased, and it's one of the biggest mistakes up to this point and to this day that we look back on.
I wonder if he had a man on the inside.
Well, it's a good question. A lot of people have thought maybe he did, but also the one cop who had erased it justified his action and sort of defended it by saying...
I can see the justification a little bit.
I understand where it came from, but it also was not very good looking back, because you could have examined his handwriting, you could have examined the chalk it was written in. There's a lot of ways it could have been used to help. One of the last things I want to note about the case, specifically about the examination of her body once it was back in the morgue, was that, her left kidney and her uterus were removed in almost a surgical way, actually.
That's weird, because that doesn't corroborate with, a little, his, earlier things seemed so messy that, it didn't seem so surgical.
Yeah, so the ear and the face was very messy, which suggests that that was the last thing he did, that he was like, I gotta go, let me just cut this quick. It was messy, but the kidney and the uterus were a lot cleaner cut, and they were, again, almost surgical. And this displayed that the killer must have had pretty good knowledge of human anatomy,
Yeah.
which sort of goes against what they originally had thought.
Yeah, it's so weird that he chooses those two.
I mean, his main motives throughout his kills were sort of unknown, but the slit throats and the disembowelment point to sexual sadism or like a hatred of women,
Yeah.
which, at the time would have been more normal than it is now. So Catherine was buried about a week later, and you can still visit her grave in the city of London. There's a plaque on
Well, that's cool.
her. Yeah, it's right on the floor. And you can still visit where she was murdered and the other places as well. It's all still there in the East End. Although now it's a different area. I mean, it's still not
Yeah.
the best part of London,
Urbanization.
but yeah, industrialization
Yeah.
happening. But yeah, so thank you.
Wild. Thank you, Sophie, for enlightening me.
Thank you for listening.
My mind is boggled.
Oh, your mind is boggled. You just really make me laugh, Caroline.
Okay.
Stay tuned for the last episode of the podcast so far, which will be airing soon, about his fifth and final canonical victim. Thank you for joining us, Caroline.
Thank you, Sophie, for having me.
Thank you.